Have you ever been betrayed by the one person you thought you could trust? Picture this. Your father builds a business from the ground up, pours his heart into it, and then, when he's gone, your own uncle, his brother, swoops in, steals it all, and kicks you to the curb like you're nothing. That's exactly what happened to me, James Carter. But here's the kicker. I didn't just walk away, I got even. Stick around because this story of greed, betrayal, and sweet revenge is one you won't forget. Let's set the stage. My dad, Michael Carter, was the kind of guy who could sell ice to a penguin. Back in the early 2000s, he started Carter's Auto Parts, a small shop in our little Ohio town. It was nothing fancy, just a gritty warehouse with stacks of tires and engine parts. But Dad had a knack for making customers feel like family. He'd remember their names, their cars, even their kids' birthdays. That's how he turned a scrappy startup into a regional chain with 5 locations by the time I was in high school. This business wasn't just his job, it was his legacy. He worked 80-hour weeks, missed my soccer games, and skipped vacations to keep it running. He always said, "James, this is for you and your sister someday." That promise kept him going, even when the economy tanked or competitors tried to undercut him. But in 2022, everything changed. Dad got sick, cancer, the aggressive kind. 6 months later, he was gone. I was 28, grieving and trying to hold it together for my little sister, Emily, who was just 19. That's when my uncle, Richard, Dad's older brother, stepped in, or, as I like to call it, when the vultures started circling. Let me introduce the cast of this drama. First, there's me, James Carter, a guy who grew up helping Dad in the shop, learning the business from the ground up. I wasn't some corporate hotshot. I was the guy unloading deliveries and joking with customers about their rusty old Fords. By the time Dad passed, I'd been managing one of the stores for 3 years, dreaming of taking the business to the next level. Then there's my sister, Emily. She's a college kid, sweet as pie, but not exactly business savvy. She trusted me to handle Dad's affairs while she focused on her studies. Emily's the heart of this story. I'd do anything to protect her. Now, meet Uncle Richard, the villain of this tale. Picture a guy who looks like he'd sell you a used car with a bad transmission and sleep like a baby afterward. Richard was always the charming one in the family. Slick hair, loud laugh, and a habit of borrowing money from Dad without paying it back. He owned a failing car dealership and had no real stake in Carter's Auto Parts, but he'd show up at family dinners acting like he was Dad's right-hand man. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. Finally, there's the business itself, Carter's Auto Parts. It wasn't just a company, it was Dad's pride and joy, worth a couple million by 2022. It was supposed to be split between me and Emily, with me running the show. But Richard had other plans, and let's just say his plans didn't include us. The betrayal unfolds, Uncle Richard's power grab. So, there I was, just weeks after Dad's funeral, still numb from losing him. I'm trying to keep the business running, juggling supplier calls and payroll, when Uncle Richard calls me into his office. Yeah, his office. Apparently, he'd convinced Mom, who was executor of Dad's estate, to let him help manage the business during the transition. I thought, okay, fine, he's family. Maybe he's just trying to pitch in. Oh, how naive I was. Richard started acting like he owned the place. He'd bark orders at employees who'd been with Dad for decades, change suppliers without consulting me, and, get this, he even redecorated Dad's office with a tacky leather couch and a framed photo of himself. I confronted him like, "Yo, Richard, what's the deal? This is mine and Emily's inheritance?" He just smirked and said, "James, you're too young to handle this. Let me take the wheel." Then came the bombshell. I got a letter from a lawyer, not even a phone call, a letter saying Richard was petitioning to take full control of Carter's Auto Parts. His claim? Dad had verbally promised him the business years ago. Verbal promise? My dad would have sooner promised his truck to a stray dog. Richard was using his charm and some shady legal moves to rewrite Dad's will behind our backs. I was furious, but I didn't know how deep this rabbit hole went yet. Kicked to the curb, losing everything. Things went from bad to worse faster than you can say Family Feud. Richard's lawyer buddies pushed through a temporary court order giving him control of the business while the will was under review. I was locked out, literally. One morning I showed up at the main store and my keycard didn't work. The security guard, a guy I'd known since I was 15, looked at me like I was a stranger and said, "Sorry, James. Orders from Richard." I lost my job, my income, and my connection to Dad's legacy in one fell swoop. Emily was devastated. She'd been counting on her share of the business to pay for college. I had to break the news to her over FaceTime, and watching her cry broke something in me. Richard didn't stop there, though. He spread rumors around town that I'd been mismanaging the business, tanking Dad's reputation to make himself look like the hero. Customers I'd known for years started giving me side-eye at the grocery store. I was living off savings, crashing on a friend's couch, and feeling like I'd failed Dad. But you know what they say. When you hit rock bottom, the only way is up. And I was already plotting my comeback. I wasn't about to let Richard waltz away with Dad's legacy. I started digging, and let me tell you, Uncle Richard's closet was full of skeletons. First, I reached out to one of Dad's old buddies, Tom, who'd been the company's accountant forever. Tom was loyal to Dad and suspicious of Richard's sudden takeover. Over beers, he let slip that Richard had been siphoning money from the business into his failing car dealership for years. Small amounts, nothing obvious, but enough to raise red flags. I also tracked down a former employee, Maria, who'd quit after Richard took over. She told me he was cutting corners, selling counterfeit parts to boost profits and pocketing the difference. Maria had emails to prove it. Emails Richard thought she'd deleted. Jackpot. I started building a case, but I needed more than just whispers and paper trails. I needed to catch him in the act. So I went full detective mode. I staked out the main warehouse one night. Yeah, I was that guy hiding behind a dumpster with binoculars. Sure enough, I saw Richard meeting some shady dude in a pickup truck, handing over cash for a crate of what looked like knockoff engine parts. I snapped photos, my heart pounding like I was in a spy movie. This wasn't just about the business anymore. It was personal. The plan, setting the trap. Armed with evidence, I hatched a plan that was equal parts risky and satisfying. I couldn't just sue Richard. He had better lawyers and deeper pockets. I needed to outsmart him, hit him where it hurt, and make sure everyone saw him for the snake he was. My goal? Get him to expose himself in front of the whole town. I teamed up with Tom and Maria, plus a few loyal employees who hated Richard's guts. We spread word that a big industry expo was happening in Cleveland, and Carter's Auto Parts was getting a Lifetime Achievement Award for Dad. Total lie, but Richard's ego was too big to fact-check. We sent him a fancy invitation, hyping it up like he'd be the star of the show. Meanwhile, I used my photos and Maria's emails to tip off the state's Consumer Protection Agency about Richard's counterfeit parts scheme. I also reached out to a local reporter, Jenna, who loved a good scandal. She agreed to cover the award ceremony, which was really just a rented conference room with a projector and a crowd of invited locals, including customers and suppliers. The trap was set and Richard was walking right into it. The showdown, Richard's fall. The day of the fake expo was like something out of a movie. Richard showed up in a rented tux, grinning like he'd already won. The room was packed. Customers, employees, even some of Dad's old competitors who'd come to honor him. I let Richard take the stage, basking in the applause before I hit play on the projector. Up popped a slideshow. Photos of Richard's shady warehouse deals, screenshots of Maria's emails, and a breakdown of the money he'd funneled to his dealership. The crowd gasped. Richard's face turned redder than a taillight as he stammered, "This is a setup." But it was too late. Jenna's news crew was filming, and the consumer protection folks were waiting in the wings with questions. I stepped up and told the room the truth. How Richard betrayed Dad's legacy, lied about the will, and tried to erase me and Emily. I showed Dad's real will, which Tom had helped me authenticate, proving the business was ours. The crowd was on my side, and Richard slunk out, humiliated. By the next week, he was facing charges for fraud, and his dealership went under. Carter's Auto Parts was back in my hands, and Emily's college fund was secure. The aftermath. Picking up the pieces. You'd think exposing Uncle Richard at the fake expo would be the end of it, right? Cue the credits, roll the happy music, and call it a day. Nope. Real life's messier than that. After Richard's dramatic exit, I was back in charge of Carter's Auto Parts, but the business was a hot mess. Richard's shady deals had tanked our reputation. Suppliers were ghosting us, customers were wary, and we were bleeding cash faster than a busted radiator. I moved back into Dad's old office, minus Richard's tacky leather couch, and got to work. My first move was to call every major customer personally. I'd say, "Hey, it's James Carter. Yeah, I know my uncle screwed things up, but I'm here to make it right." Some hung up, but others gave me a chance. I also rehired Maria and a few loyal employees Richard had fired. They were like family, and we were all in this together. The hardest part? Facing Emily. She was proud of me for taking Richard down, but she was stressed about her college bills. I promised her, "Em, I'll fix this. Dad's legacy is going to take care of you." Easier said than done, but I was fueled by coffee, spite, and a whole lot of determination. A new threat. Richard's last stand. Just when I thought Richard was out of the picture, he came slithering back like a cockroach after a nuclear blast. Turns out, he wasn't done fighting. While I was busy rebuilding the business, Richard hired a new lawyer, some slick guy from out of state, and filed a countersuit. His claim? I'd defamed him at the expo and owed him damages. Damages. The guy who stole our inheritance was playing the victim card. I was livid, but I should have seen it coming. Richard was the kind of guy who'd trip you, then sue you for getting dirt on his shoes. His lawyer sent me letters demanding I turn over the business again or pay him a ridiculous sum. I didn't have that kind of money, and the legal fees alone were eating into our profits. One night I was venting to Tom, the accountant, over pizza. He said, "James, Richard's desperate. He's got no dealership, no cash, and a fraud case hanging over him. This lawsuit's his last shot." That's when it hit me. Richard wasn't just after money. He wanted to drag me down with him. I wasn't about to let that happen, so I started planning round 2 of Operation Get Richard. Turning the tables, outsmarting Richard. Again. To beat Richard at his own game, I needed to think like him. Sneaky, but smarter. I knew his lawsuit was a bluff to scare me into settling, so I played along. I had my lawyer send back a letter saying I was open to negotiations. Richard took the bait and agreed to meet at a diner to discuss terms. Classic Richard, he probably thought he'd charm me into surrender over greasy fries. What he didn't know was that I'd done my homework. I'd gotten a tip from Jenna, the reporter, about Richard's new lawyer. Turns out, this guy had a history of shady tactics and was under investigation for ethics violations. I also dug into Richard's finances with Tom's help and found he'd been hiding assets to dodge the fraud charges. Think offshore accounts and a sketchy LLC. At the diner, I let Richard ramble about how I'd ruined his life. Then I slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of his hidden accounts and a screenshot of his lawyer's disciplinary record. I said, "Drop the lawsuit, Richard, or this goes to the DA." His jaw dropped like a cartoon anvil. For once, he had nothing to say. Rebuilding the legacy. A win for Dad. Richard backed off, dropping the lawsuit faster than you can say, "Checkmate." With him out of the way for good, I could finally focus on bringing Carter's Auto Parts back to life. I took a risk and invested in a new online store. Something Dad had always wanted to do. It was a grind. Late nights learning website code and arguing with tech support, but it paid off. Orders started rolling in from across the state, then the country. I also launched a campaign to rebuild trust. We offered discounts to old customers, donated parts to local mechanics schools, and even hosted a car show in Dad's name. The community showed up in droves, and I'll never forget the moment Emily cut the ribbon at the event. She whispered, "Dad would be so proud." I had to blink back tears because she was right. By mid-2024, the business was profitable again. Emily's college was paid for, and I even hired her as our social media manager. Turns out she's a TikTok wizard. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving. But the best part? Knowing Richard was watching from the sidelines, powerless, while Dad's legacy shone brighter than ever. The final twist, Richard's downfall. Just when I thought this story couldn't get juicier, Richard handed me one last gift. Remember those offshore accounts I'd found? I anonymously tipped off the authorities, and let's just say the IRS doesn't mess around. A few months later, Jenna sent me a news clipping. Richard had been hit with tax evasion charges on top of his fraud case. He was looking at serious fines and maybe even jail time. I didn't gloat. Okay, maybe I gloated a little. I framed that article and hung it in my office, right next to Dad's old business license. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Richard had tried to erase us, but we came out stronger. I pictured Dad looking down, probably chuckling and saying, "That's my boy." The cherry on top? At the car show, a customer came up and said, "James, your dad would have loved this. You're keeping his spirit alive." That moment hit harder than any victory over Richard. It reminded me why I'd fought so hard, not just to win, but to honor the man who started it all. Since you've requested main content part 3 without blocks, I'll provide a new Osnovnaya main content section as a continuous narrative, avoiding the block structure used previously. This will be the third installment of the main content, building on the story of James Carter's revenge against his Uncle Richard while keeping the tone informal, friendly, and humorous, tailored for a U.S. audience in a Reddit-style family drama, betrayal, and revenge audio story. I'll maintain the English language, vivid details, and examples to keep viewers hooked, extending the narrative from where main content part 2 left off, after Richard's tax evasion charges and the business's revival. The goal is to deepen the drama, add new twists, and sustain suspense without breaking into distinct subheadings or blocks. If you meant something else, e.g. revising previous sections or moving to the climax, please clarify, and I'll adjust immediately. Here's the continuous narrative. All right, folks, you'd think by now I'd be kicking back with a cold one, basking in the glow of victory. Carter's Auto Parts was back on track, Emily was killing it at college, and Uncle Richard was drowning in legal troubles. But life's got a funny way of throwing curveballs just when you think you're in the clear. I was about to learn that winning a war doesn't mean the battle's over, and Richard wasn't the only snake in the grass. With the business picking up steam, I started getting cocky. I was doing interviews with local papers, hyping up our comeback story, and even got invited to speak at a small business conference in Columbus. I felt like the king of Ohio Auto Parts, strutting around like I'd cracked the code to Dad's legacy. That's when I noticed something weird. Our online store was getting hit with a flood of negative reviews, like hundreds overnight. Stuff like, "Terrible service, fake parts, don't trust these guys." I knew our parts were legit. I'd triple-checked every supplier after Richard's counterfeit fiasco. This wasn't just bad luck, it was sabotage. I stayed up all night with a pot of coffee and a laptop, digging into the reviews. Most of the accounts were brand new, with no purchase history, and their IP addresses traced to a single location. Shady, right? I called my buddy Nate, who's a bit of a tech wizard, and he confirmed it. Someone was paying for bots to tank our reputation. My gut told me Richard was behind it. Even with his legal mess, he was petty enough to pull something this low. But proving it was another story, and I wasn't about to let him drag Dad's name through the mud again. I decided to play detective again, but this time I went old school. I remembered Richard had a buddy, Vince, who ran a sketchy marketing firm in town. Vince was the kind of guy who'd sell his own grandma for a quick buck, and he'd been tight with Richard since their high school days. I figured if anyone was helping Richard orchestrate this smear campaign, it was him. So I did what any rational person would do. I showed up at Vince's office with a box of donuts and a fake smile, pretending I wanted to hire his firm for our marketing. Vince bought it probably because he smelled money. Over coffee, I steered the conversation to online reviews, dropping hints about competitors who play dirty. He got cocky and started bragging about how he could make or break any business with a few clicks. Then he let slip something golden. "Yeah, I've got a client right now who's real motivated to take down a certain auto parts chain." Bingo. I kept my cool, thanked him for the chat, and left with a recording of the whole conversation on my phone. Gotta love modern technology. Armed with Vince's slip-up, I took it to Jenna, my reporter friend, who was itching for another scoop. She dug into Vince's firm and found a paper trail linking his bot accounts to payments from an LLC tied to Richard. Apparently, Richard had funneled some of his hidden cash into this revenge plot before the IRS caught up with him. Jenna ran a story exposing the scheme, and the negative reviews started getting flagged and removed. Our customers rallied behind us, posting real reviews to drown out the fakes. It was like the whole town was saying, "Not today, Richard." But the drama didn't stop there. Just as I was celebrating this win, I got a call from Emily, and she was freaking out. She'd been digging into Dad's old files for a college project and found something weird. A loan agreement from years ago, signed by Dad and Richard for $50,000. The fine print said if the loan wasn't repaid, Richard could claim a stake in the business. Dad had paid it off. Tom confirmed it. But Richard had never filed the paperwork to clear the debt. Now, with Richard's fraud and tax cases falling apart, he was trying to use this ancient loan to make one last grab for Carter's Auto Parts. I was done playing nice. I met with my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Carla who could scare a pit bull. We pulled every document Dad had ever signed, cross-referenced them with bank records, and built an airtight case showing the loan was paid in full. Carla also found that Richard had forged a second version of the agreement to make it look like the debt was still active. Forgery? Really, Richard? That's a new low, even for you. Carla didn't just stop at disproving the loan. She went for the jugular, filing a motion to have Richard's assets frozen until his fraud and tax cases were settled. That meant no more shady LLCs or bot armies. I also tipped off the DA about the forged loan document, which added another charge to Richard's rap sheet. By this point, he was running out of moves, and I could practically hear him sweating through the phone when his lawyer called to beg for a deal. While all this was going down, I wasn't just fighting Richard, I was growing the business in ways Dad never could. I partnered with a local charity to donate parts for low-income families' car repairs, which got us some great press and reminded me why I loved this work. Emily came up with a genius idea to start a YouTube channel for the business, posting DIY car repair tips. Our videos went viral, and suddenly we were getting orders from as far as California. It was like Dad's spirit was guiding us, turning every one of Richard's punches into a chance to shine. The final nail in Richard's coffin came unexpectedly. One of our oldest customers, Mr. Thompson, stopped by the shop with a story. Back in the day, he'd overheard Richard trying to convince Dad to sell the business for a quick profit. Dad had shut him down, saying, "This is for my kids, not your wallet." Mr. Thompson had recorded the conversation on his old flip phone. Don't ask me why, he's just that guy. He gave me the file and it was pure gold. Richard admitting he didn't care about the business, just the cash. I handed it to Carla, who used it to seal Richard's fate in court. By late 2024, Richard was out of options. His lawsuits were thrown out, his assets were seized, and he was facing years of legal battles. Meanwhile, Carter's Auto Parts was stronger than ever, with a new store opening in Dayton, and Emily planning to join the business full-time after graduation. Every time I walked into the shop, I felt Dad's presence like he was nodding and saying, "Keep it up, James." Richard thought he could break us, but all he did was make us unstoppable. Buckle up, because this is where the story hits its peak, and let me tell you, it felt like the grand finale of a fireworks show. After months of battling Richard's lies, lawsuits, and bot armies, I got a call from Carla, my lawyer, that made my jaw drop. She'd been working with the DA, and they'd uncovered a bombshell. Richard hadn't just forged the loan document to claim a stake in Carter's Auto Parts. He'd been running a whole network of fake companies to launder money from his shady deals, and our business was one of his targets. This wasn't just about greed anymore. Richard was in deep with some seriously bad people. The DA had enough evidence to charge him with racketeering on top of the fraud, tax evasion, and forgery counts. But the real kicker? They found a recorded phone call, intercepted during their investigation, where Richard bragged about taking care of James and Emily by burying them in legal fees. He even laughed about how he'd outsmarted Dad's will. Hearing that tape, I felt a mix of rage and vindication. This wasn't just proof of his betrayal. It was Richard handing me the final piece to end him for good. Carla set up a court hearing to present all the evidence, and I made sure it was public. I wanted Richard to face the music in front of everyone he'd tried to fool. The day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Customers, employees, even Jenna with her news crew. Richard walked in looking like a deflated balloon, his slick hair a mess, his charm long gone. When the judge played the recorded call, you could hear a pin drop. Then came Mr. Thompson's flip phone recording, where Richard admitted he only cared about the money. The crowd gasped, and I saw Richard sink lower in his chair. For the first time, he looked small, like the bully who finally got caught. The judge didn't hold back. She ruled that Richard had no claim to Carter's Auto Parts, dismissed his lawsuits, and ordered him to pay restitution to me and Emily for the financial damage he'd caused. Then she turned to the criminal charges, setting a trial date that promised to keep Richard tied up in court for years. As he was led out, he shot me a glare, but I just smiled. This was it, the moment I'd been fighting for. Dad's legacy was safe, and Richard was done. The courtroom victory wasn't just a win. It was a seismic shift. For me and Emily, it meant we could finally breathe. The business was ours, free and clear, with no more legal battles looming. We used the restitution money to open another store and fund Emily's dream of starting a scholarship in Dad's name for kids who wanted to study automotive tech. Every time I saw a student get that scholarship, it felt like Dad was right there, cheering us on. The fallout for Richard was brutal, and honestly, he deserved every bit of it. His racketeering charges made national news, and his name became synonymous with "Don't be that guy." His car dealership was seized, his fancy house went into foreclosure, and last I heard, he was living in a rundown apartment, dodging creditors. The guy who thought he could outsmart everyone was left with nothing but a rap sheet and a bad reputation. Poetic justice, right? But the real significance went beyond Richard's downfall. The whole town rallied around Carter's Auto Parts like never before. Customers who doubted us came back, sharing stories about how Dad had helped them out years ago. Our YouTube channel exploded, turning us into a bit of a local legend. I even got a letter from a guy in Texas who said our story inspired him to stand up to his own shady relative. That hit me hard. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about showing people that you can fight back, even when the odds are stacked against you. Most importantly, this whole saga brought me and Emily closer than ever. We'd been through hell, but we came out stronger, with a bond that no one could break. Every time we walked into the shop, we felt Dad's spirit, like he was proud we'd kept his dream alive. Richard thought he could tear us apart, but all he did was light a fire that made us unstoppable. So, there you have it, folks. The wild ride of how I, James Carter, took down my scheming Uncle Richard and saved my dad's legacy. To recap, Richard tried to steal Carter's Auto Parts, kicked me out, and thought he could bury me and Emily in lies and lawsuits. But with a little detective work, some loyal allies, and a whole lot of grit, we turned the tables. Richard's now facing a laundry list of charges, his empire's in ruins, and our business is thriving like never before. We've got new stores, a viral YouTube channel, and a scholarship in Dad's name that's changing lives. Most importantly, Emily and I proved that family, the real kind, is stronger than any betrayal. Dad's looking down, probably raising a toast with his old coffee mug, and that's the best win of all. Now I want to hear from you. Has anyone in your life ever tried to pull a Richard and stab you in the back? How'd you handle it? Or maybe you've got your own epic revenge story that deserves its moment in the spotlight. Spill the tea in the comments below. Let's get this discussion poppin'. And tell me, what's the one thing you'd do if you could get back at your own shady uncle? Let's keep this story alive together.